Thanks so much for being here for our VentureCrush return to live music. We will also talk about venture capital and startups and M&A deals and even IPOs, which there are a couple of this week, which is pretty exciting. But I'm especially excited to start bringing live music back to VentureCrush, which has been a feature of what we do for so long. So I'm Ed Zimmerman. I work here at Lowenstein Sandler, and we're excited to have all of you here. I'll give you a couple of notes before we start. There is a QR code on the bottom of the screens or in the handout. We'd love for you to join the chat if you'd like. Don't join if you're in the room. Don't join the audio because the feedback will be kind of very Velvet Underground in a bad way. There are speaker and performer bios that are going to be dropped in the chat. If you don't have them, we will also try to answer some of your questions. I want to thank our Lowenstein colleagues, Henry Shu, Lauren Russell, Wale Fatai for research help, and our Lowenstein Sandler events team, without whom these things would not happen. Jenny Amador, Ginny Wagner, Angela Brondum, Karen Martins, Owen Lewis, Ariel Prekop, Brittany Harlos, and of course, Carrie Fisk. We would be delighted to have you introduce yourselves in the chat, whether you're in the room or on Zoom. Use your LinkedIn links. Tell us who you are. We have a couple of upcoming events. We have our VentureCrush Africa Global event on Wednesday, and our colleague Raquel Smith is in the back and is one of the co-founders of our Africa practice here at Lowenstein. That's Wednesday, April 3rd, 5 p.m. right here. How does Africa create more angel investors? And there'll be a reg link in the chat. We have another Women in VC event on Tuesday, April 9th at 2 p.m. That's a Zoom event. Those events are terrific. And our Lowenstein colleagues, Deandra Chin, Raquel Smith, Alyssa Frederick, Chandra Shi, and Meredith Bushaw. I saw Meredith as well floating around here someplace. There we go. Are going to be discussing venture debt for founders, investors, and advisors. And we have another one of these on May 15th. And we will have, VentureCrush FGX, where startups actually come and pitch. The only thing we're pitching today is Margaret Glaspie's amazing music, which I know we will make sales of. But we do have this pitch thing, VentureCrush FGX, that's May 15th in New York. And then because it is VentureCrush's 25th year, we believe we're the longest continuously running startup and venture event in New York. We think on the East Coast, but definitely in New York. And if people know otherwise, let us know. We're going to do some fun things for our 25th year, including bringing back multi-Grammy winner Sarah Watkins, who first performed at VentureCrush in 2012. So it's kind of like her bat mitzvah for Venture, 13, almost. We also, for those attending here in Lowenstein, we're going to hear from Guitar Hero songwriter Margaret Glaspie up here for a few minutes of talk, but you're actually going to get to see her wail on the guitar and sing at our office in our Lowenstein Sandler library down the hall after the conversations here. You should definitely stick around for it. And if you're on Zoom, that's a reason to get off Zoom and come to Midtown Manhattan and check it out. So that's it for the notes. Margaret, if you wouldn't mind coming up and grabbing a seat of your choosing. I'm really excited to have you here. And I'm just gonna read one little review piece, welcome, and then I'll ask you a couple of questions, and we should probably start that clock. So NPR talked about your biting guitar-driven rock. The New Yorker called your songwriting whip smart, and Pitchfork says that you have a spellbinding voice. Acoustic Guitar said that you play electric guitar like a goddess. I don't know if they're qualified because it's acoustic electric. And there's this comment there's this review of of your new album in Paste Magazine, and it talks about Emotion and Math, which is your extraordinary 2016 album. And it says that you had just released your debut and you were establishing yourself in 2016 as one of the most formidable guitar players of her era. And the reviewer was a freshman in undergrad going through a big singer-songwriter indie folk phase. But what you were doing, Margaret, truly tapped into what I wanted from the genre. It was her guitar playing, which was gravitational, like an unshakable centerpiece that pulled me in. So I say these things because your friend Nora Jones recently did something with you and talked about how she's, quote, in love with your guitar playing. So how do you react when people talk about you being a singer-songwriter, given how extraordinarily kick-ass you are on guitar?
Wow. I think it's a wonderful compliment to call me a great singer-songwriter. Yeah, I guess I've always just thought of playing guitar as a part of that, and so I never thought of it as separate. And I think of it kind of ingrained into the songwriting process, is kind of creating guitar figures and playing it to the best of my ability. So, yeah, I think sometimes I don't think of myself as a guitar player, but I think of myself as a writer. And I know that there are other realities that I'm not living in, that obviously I am a guitar player, but I don't always see myself as that, which is interesting. So, yeah, I think of the guitar as this integral piece to song. And I think that sometimes as a singer and a songwriter, it kind of entails this really long list of to-dos. You have to try and be really good at a lot of different things, including like lyrics and singing and guitar. And so sometimes some of them slip away, but I try and stay on top of it the best that I can.
So you did an interview several years ago in which you talked about being a completist, and the interviewer, who was really good, asked you a follow-up question. You explained it as like, well, if I want to make a cucumber sandwich, I have to bake the bread, grow mustard seeds, turn it into mustard, grow cucumbers, churn the milk for the butter, or I guess it wasn't milk in those days for you, right? But
Right.
Can you talk about how you think about the virtue and pain of being a completist, and how is that different from perfectionism?
Well, I would say that just because you want to do all of them doesn't make them perfect. I guess that's like the difference maybe. But I think that sometimes it might be, for me, slightly, maybe like a little bit compulsive on some level, where it's just maybe just how I operate, that once you know that it might be a little bit better if you can grow the grain to make the bread, or then you kind of are curious, and so I've never grown the grain, but I've certainly made the bread, and I need to get to that step. But I do think that often I see it come up a lot. My husband would certainly echo that, of somehow I always end up doing it all. Even though I just wanted to do one thing, I end up getting very invested and very curious about all aspects of it. And I think that it would probably apply to music pretty deeply, in the sense that if you're writing a song and then you do think, oh, this could have a really cool line, and then you think, well, think of all the music that exists and all the things that we could reference and all the things that we could think about. And I know that you're an Elliott Smith fan. And when I think about someone like Elliott Smith, I think about a lot of the lines in his music come certainly from classical music. And there's a real reference there, all this contrapuntal movement and all this cool stuff going on in his music. And I would say, I never knew him, but I would say he was probably a completist on some level, because when you listen to his music and you hear a lot of different worlds all at once. So it feels like it's being infused. He's kind of searched, in some sense, far and wide to find what he's put in there, or at least it sounds like that. And I like that feeling for sure.
And you brought up Elliott Smith, who tragically passed away 20 plus, just over 20 years ago, and was an extraordinary artist and songwriter. I know you have a special relationship with the song "Stupidity Tries," and which I would commend to all of you to listen to after you've listened to Margaret's music. I think also we're going to drop a link to one of my several Margaret playlists. But do you want to talk at all about why that particular song is of value to you? And
I mean, I think that it's a good song. It's just a great song. I love it. I used to skateboard. I'm 35 now. I used to skateboard to that song with earbuds in Brooklyn in my mid-20s, all over the city. And I think that there's a little like timestamp on my brain in some way with that song. And yeah, it's just that's a good one. I mean, there's so many of his records and songs that are like that for me that kind of stamp eras of my life, certainly. So that one is one that is very New York-y to me. I feel it in New York quite a bit.
You mentioned, coming or being in New York, and you were an emerging artist in New York, having come down from Boston. You're not from here. You did this interview with Jamie Lee Curtis and Emily King about some of the friendships that nourished and sustained you when you were here as a young artist. And it's a lot like the startup community, where you really do need to have a support system as you're trying to kind of break in and make that network. Can you talk a little bit about how you developed and returned to some of those friendships, or some of the kind of nourishment that you found in the New York arts community?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting in New York, because when I moved here, I think it was 2010 when I moved to New York City. I was probably 21. And it was a really exciting time to be a musician in New York, because there were just so many venues and there was so much, you could casually be downtown and just, you just stayed up late enough, like a lot would happen, which was so cool. And I mean it, because there were so many venues that were open that if you could go, if you started at 8 and you popped into one, well, you knew that at 9 o'clock there would be one across town, and then at 10:30 there'd be another one across the other way. And all in between, you get in all kinds of mischief. So it was just a special time, because everyone was doing that and kind of creating these dot-to-dots downtown. And that was definitely how I made my start, was just I would play and play and play. Every week I'd have a lot of residencies at either the Living Room in the Lower East Side, Rockwood Music Hall, Cornelia Street Cafe, Pete's Candy Store, to name just a few, the Knitting Factory, all these different spots. And in all those places, I met some of my best friends, certainly. And it was important, because it was, you're young and you're connecting the dots, and things are slightly hard and, sought after. Opportunities are very sought after. And so I just took everything and anything that I could get my hands on. And I was babysitting at the time. That was my day job. And then I would go, and directly after working, I'd schlep all my stuff to my babysitting job. And then directly after it, I'd take my amp and all my gear, and I would go to my gig. And, if I had a residency, it was every week for sometimes like 3 months. So every week you do that. But then if you had that on Tuesday, you'd try and get some other gig on Thursday, and you'd have it you start to put your week together on some level. And within all of these, sometimes I was playing the worst gig that you could ever possibly obtain, which was like 5 o'clock on a Tuesday. There's no sound person. I'm like trying to do the levels myself and play the song, and there's one person in the audience, literally one. So it was not always easy, certainly, but because it wasn't easy, you really made a lot of friends, because a lot of people were in the same boat. So yeah, Emily King was a dear friend from that time specifically, and she was from here, so she was able to kind of be my guide in many ways, which is very sweet.
That's awesome.
And my husband now, Julian, we met in Boston in music school, and we were coming up at the same time in New York and figuring it all out. So there's just a lot of sweetness in the air. I think now there are less venues for sure in New York City. And so it is a different feeling in some ways. But I know that there are young people kicking around doing it as we speak.
You mentioned your husband, Julian. I could try to be funny and ask, does he play an instrument? But your husband is an extraordinary musician.
Yes.
And my wife, Betsy, and I co-founded a fund with some friends, a fund of funds called First Close Partners, through which we invest in underrepresented, owned and operated venture funds. And there are some amazing things about partnering with your partner. And Betsy and I have been together since we're 18 years old, which is a long time in my case. And there are some things like work becomes inescapable. You produced some of his music. I don't believe that he has ever done production on your music. Does the I'm in charge roll in one direction? What are the dynamics of, do you produce his non-music life? What are the dynamics of having two guitarists who put out albums in the family?
Yeah, it's super fun, to be honest with you. I think Julian is, we kind of, whether we're credited with production on one another's records, we're very immersed into one another's work for sure. So I'm showing him all of my music all the time. And he co-produced my last record. So he helped me with it some. And I've kind of been a little more in the driver's seat at times for his records, in just bearing witness to them and producing them. But it's always been a thrill, honestly. It's always been really fun. I think that we're lucky in the sense that Julian really likes feedback. He really likes getting that in real time feedback on his work. And he happens to trust me. And so I'm very honest with him. And I think it works for whatever reason. And yeah, there's never been any crazy hot water feeling like, ooh, super treacherous or uncomfortable. But I think it's because we just keep it very above board in terms of just airing everything out pretty intensely in terms of trying to get to the bottom of problems or roadblocks. But I think we're very lucky to have that partnership because we have each other's best interests in mind, certainly. There's totally learning lessons and learning curves with it where you go wow, we haven't thought about anything else other than records and music for days, weeks, months, years. So that can get a little kooky, but it's really just we got to go do something stupid. You know what I mean? That's how I think we get out of it. We need to go do something that doesn't make sense. And then that kind of, I think, refreshes our brains. But sometimes things start to make too much sense where we're just trying to make sense of everything constantly.
Well, since you're talking about brains, so on your amazing, most recent album, Echo the Diamond, you have this great song, which I hope we're going to hear later, about your female brain. And as you're listening to the song, you think, often people are not really writing in the first person. It's a narrative thing. But in the song, you assert, my name is Margaret. And you're this is I'm pissed off, don't F with me. And I'm curious to know what the reaction has been to female brain in particular. And maybe also you did an amazing song called My Body, My Choice, and what the reaction has been to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, female brain has been really fun because there's a drum beat to that song that people just get into, and I think they don't even always know what they're listening to. They're just really into it, and so it's kind of a fun Trojan horse of a song because everyone's kind of jamming along, and then they realize that it's
A feminist anthem.
yeah. But also, it's very sweet, honestly, because we'll be on our tour for that record, and we were touring in the U.S. One night we were in Salt Lake City, and there was just a row of college boys just in the front that knew every word to every song, and they were screaming out "my female brain" like at the top of their lungs, and they just loved it. They were so in it. And I mean, truly, my band was like laughing as they were playing because it was so funny. But it's refreshing. It's really refreshing. You see a lot of like big hearts and a lot of humanity in playing songs like that, because you see that I think that I'm playing it, to women, and at the same, it's not. It's for everybody, and everyone's getting something from it. And no matter what. Your gender, I feel like it's really just the feeling of feeling alienated in any way, or feeling kind of dismissed in any way. It feels unnerving, and so I think that people might relate to just that aspect of it. And with My Body, My Choice, I think that song pushes a little further. I think pushes a little more buttons, I mean, I've gotten some sour uncomfortableness around that song at times, but for the most part also pretty refreshing. Like a lot of men thanking me afterward in venues and states that I wouldn't expect at times, which is very sweet and welcome. It's really, really cool. So I feel pleasantly surprised all the time at just like the humanity in the room often. And sometimes it sucks, and sometimes it's great.
Well, music never sucks. It's always great. And last two quick things. One is, so it's very hard to see the transition. The end result is like electric guitar in a way that is just so masterful. And the start was Texas-style competitive fiddle. You can't get there from here or vice versa. Like, how did that happen? And then the last thing is, if there are things that we should be listening, or places people should go to see and hear you and also your husband, Julian Lodge.
Yeah. I was a Texas-style fiddle player when I was little. That was my first instrument and like my entry into being a musician. And it was really special because I really kind of happened in, by way of the fiddle, I happened into this acoustic music scene that was really virtuosic and incredible. And it led me to people like Sarah. I mean, Sarah Watkins was my, Sarah encouraged me to write the first song I ever wrote, which was kind of incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was like 14 or 15 years old.
That's awesome.
And so I was in this very kind of slightly insular fiddle scene. It was pretty specific. Yeah.
As all of us
insular.
were at one point or another.
As one does. And I was in fiddle camps all my life. I would go to the Western Open was this fiddle competition in my town. I would go to the Old Time National Fiddle Competition, which is in Weiser, Idaho. Not the band, but
Is the band named
town.
after?
Nope, different spelling. I wanted it to be that. I was certain that Weiser was involved somehow, but it wasn't. So I was in this kind of bubble of acoustic musicianship, and it really engendered a lot of listening, deep listening, and sensitivity to others in terms of just being able to adapt quickly and being able to listen intensely and respond musically. And that was really kind of my real music school, I think, as a young person coming up in that scene. I missed a lot of school because I had these friends that kind of took me under their wing and would take me to fiddle competitions and camps and stuff like that. But at the same time, by way of that, I was meeting people like Sarah Watkins, or Edgar Meyer would be the bass teacher at the camp, or Chris Thiele would be there, and I met my husband, by way of a lot of that community.
Fiddle competition is like a dating app.
No, not quite. But it was the grease to like this whole it greased all these cogs really that kind of somehow got me to start to write songs and led me to what I do now. And it was a really cool way to get there because it was a sensitive and really deep listening, all about the music kind of crew for sure. So that was kind of the way from Texas style fiddle to where I am now. And then, what's going on with me? I'm about to go on an acoustic tour, which is kind of unusual for me. It kind of feels like coming back to my roots in some ways of speaking to all this fiddle music. And so I've always made pretty plugged in, like kind of rock records. And in May I'll be doing an acoustic tour, so it'll be kind of like an unplugged thing, and that's all along the East Coast. And in New York, I'll play in Brooklyn, I think at National Sawdust, sometime in May. I can't remember the dates, but early May I'll be touring.
Well, we will let people know. I like that venue.
Great.
Awesome. Well, it's been fantastic chatting with you, and I'm excited having sat alone to sneak into the sound check, which I loved. Thank you. I'm really excited to hear you a little later. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so people did ask, like, why are we having Margaret Glaspie at VentureCrush? What does she have to do with venture? And my answer is, like, she put math in the title of an album. And in 2012, she released an album with her friends, most of whom are the majority of a band called Lake Street Dive, called The Fundies. And we do talk about venture funds. So, it's close enough, I think. So why don't we have our friends Jocelyn and Nasir, who run their own fundies, come on up, and we'll talk about actual venture capital, although there's a lot of analogy between the startup scene and startup musicians. So Nasir and Jocelyn, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you both here, and you're both very much out-of-towners.
That's right.
And Nasir, maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about Zeal and you and your background, and you can include a little bit of geography, although you owned a coffee shop, or you ran a coffee shop here.
That's right, in the West Village. And interesting enough, that's how I got my start in venture. It's so great to be here, and thank you for being a partner since day zero. Also want to congratulate you. I believe that you just was selected the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Impact winner by the National Venture Capital Association. So I just want to show love to Ed and Betsy and Carolina.
Yeah,
your work.
First Close Partners,
Yes.
Which I co-founded with some friends, including especially Carolina and my Carolina Juanca Mendoza and my wife Betsy, and our 5 other wonderful co-founders: Teresa Gao, Josh Koppelman, former Surgeon General Regina Benjamin, PJ Parson, and Annika Sten Parson. It's your typical fund of funds with offices in Stockholm, Alabama, San Francisco, Philadelphia, and New York, Jersey. So but thank you. That's kind of you.
Congratulations, of course. Does not go unnoticed at all. It's so great to be here. Nasir Qadri, the founder and managing partner at a firm called Zeal Capital Partners, like Zealous. We're based out of Washington, D.C., and we're focused on backing exceptional, diverse management teams. And we mean that holistically: diversity of backgrounds, skill set, and of course, gender, ethnicity exclusively. And that are rethinking the building blocks of wealth, from education to employment pathways to financial technology with a lens towards wellness and inclusion, and now health equity as our third category. And so we believe financial technology, future work and learning, and healthcare play a critical role in the midst of turbocharging economic mobility here in this country and at scale of the globe. Today, we're about just north of $100 million, investing out of two accounts. And this work is deeply rooted personally. I have dedicated a little over a decade now rethinking how, where we source, invest, and scale particularly mission-driven companies that I've always felt are critical to turbocharging economic mobility. And I felt, healthcare, education, workforce, and financial services was critical. Also feel from an alpha generation perspective, these are also very archaic, continue still to this day, archaic industries and are always ripe for innovation, no matter which market we sit in. Prior to Zeal, in the spirit of just friendship and community, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a Georgia boy at heart, and I'm a graduate of an HBCU called Hampton University. Love you and the first close partners, but Hampton is one of my favorite limited partners. And I know you have a connection with, you're on the board of Fisk College, my understanding. And so, which is also, there is a bit of a strategy and a connection in terms of involving HBCUs. But as Ed alluded to, I spent time first in the public markets here in New York City at both Goldman Sachs and State Street Bank, and just fell in love with broader economics and markets. But as a kid from Atlanta, grew up on the other side of the tracks, and as a first generation college graduate in my family, I knew that I wanted to do mission-driven work. And for a long time, I felt that you had to either work in government or work in a nonprofit to impact communities. And the more I matured across my career, I realized that I don't have to forego my love for financial services. And by sitting on nonprofit boards, particularly in education, I found a way we can mirror the two. And many of us call this impact investing, which we're seeing a lot of both on the investor and the limited partner side. And that's where I started really exploring, at the blessing of my mentor at State Street Bank, and said, "Nasir, you're spending a lot of time in New York City at this coffee shop. You seem entrenched in the early stage investing ecosystem here in New York City. Why don't you consider what's next?" And so I spent that time in the coffee shop really learning about venture capital, learning about the private markets, learning about impact investing, and even more specifically ed tech, because that was the sector I cared deeply about. I started making some angel investments. And so, long story short, started my career in the private markets as an angel investor, and moved to DC to become global head of education, technology, and investments at a firm called Village Capital, and then led their U.S. economic opportunity portfolio, expanding my lens to fintech and healthcare. AT&T was an early backer, which I can double click on that experience, and that's where I led their $400 million social investment fund, which was a unique experience coming from corporate venture. And then, built a solid track record and had some incredible mentors who pushed me to launch my own investment platform. And so I'm just, as an entrepreneur first, I'm just so in awe of the opportunity set in terms of building a differentiated investment platform. And so excited to talk more.
That's a great telling of the story. And just one quick thing, and then we'll hop over to Jocelyn. You mentioned corporate venturing at AT&T, and you and I have talked about this a little bit in the past, but corporate venture capital groups don't always have the same kind of exciting brand that pure venture funds do. But corporate VC is the place where so many of the now leading underrepresented and particularly Black venture investors got their start. And that is a real opportunity for venture firms that are pure play venture firms rather than strategics. And it's also a hats off to the corporate VCs that have created a more inclusive ecosystem. And I don't know if your experience at AT&T was...
It was a great experience. I think, one, you were your own LP, so you were investing off of balance sheet capital. You weren't out there raising capital. So everyone also answered your phone calls. Everyone knew the AT&T big blue ball. And so it was cool to also just galvanize not just folks here in New York City and San Francisco, where most of us think of your traditional tech entrepreneurial investor hotbed, but really looking at, other ecosystems that I, spent a lot of time. In fact, 74% of my track record is outside of New York, Boston, and San Francisco, where today still 80% of capital, venture capital, that is, continues to flow. And so that experience really catapult this inclusive investing strategy that is core to Zeal's investment mandate. But great experience at AT&T, and a lot of my peers and friends also, felt the same.
Awesome. Jocelyn, the world's first pure AI-focused venture fund. So started, 6 months ago?
So Zeta Venture Partners, named after the zettabyte, which for the nerds in the audience is 1 trillion gigabytes.
That's like everyone but Margaret. So we're clear.
So started 10 years ago, which you're talking about. We haven't found an older one, been 25-year running conference in New York. We haven't found another AI fund that's more than 10 years old.
Can't use ML or AI to find another.
Yes. So we so from the get-go, my partner Mark Orenberg was the founder of the firm, and he had been in venture for over 20 years and had working at a firm called Hummer Winblad, which was founded in 1989, 1990, and rose to prominence because Hummer was the first. I think of it as kind of like just one of the kind of grand sandhill firms, original sandhill firms. And I think of them as a generalist investor. But in fact, the way they made their name was by being very contrarian. In 1989, they said, we will only invest in software. And this was a contrarian thing for a VC firm to do because at the time it was mostly hardware systems company. It was the Silicon and Silicon Valley. And they said, we think that hardware has become commodity. The value is coming from applications. We're going to invest in software only. And they were very successful with that for a number of years until software became so ubiquitous that saying you invest in software is not a focus anymore. And lo and behold, they just kind of organically became a generalist firm. And so, but Mark never lost sight of it was that time when they were so focused and they were embedded in one community, one domain, that they really built the firm. And so he saw this happen again with first the internet and then the wave of cloud computing come through. And Hummer was investing in internet companies, they're investing in cloud companies, but they never kind of were singularly focused on it in that way. And he saw other firms who did singularly focus on it and who really outperformed. And so when he saw, he was investing in analytics companies, he was seeing big data, he saw the rise of machine learning. He's like, I think this is the next generational change in computing. And to seize the opportunity, you have to have a firm that's completely focused on this, that's not trying to do everything. And so that's been our mantra from day one. I joined Mark a little over 7 years ago. So it's now, last month it became the longest tenure I've had in any job, but I'm not a founder of the firm. Started at the beginning of Fund 2. We're now investing out of our third fund. We're seed stage focused, so we back founders, as early as the day they form their company. Maybe a day or two after that, our lawyers like us to wait before presenting a term sheet. So I didn't say that. It's at least 2 weeks after inception is when we present the term sheet, and at least minimum. And then, but really evolved to serve founders of AI native companies and support them in the 0 to 1 stage on their journey, and sort of bring the ethos of not spray and pray small checks, but meaningful checks that lead the round, that bring the round together, and provide not just the capital, because frankly that's a commodity these days, especially for AI entrepreneurs, but the support, the connections, the insight, and everything else, and and the blood, sweat, and tears that we can help try to get them to the finish line of the first lap, and then the next lap. So. And we've been really fortunate. We got to work with some of the pioneers of the first generation of machine learning, not just analytics companies like Domo or the kind of pioneers in MLOps like Domino Data Lab or Kaggle. And then here in the kind of what I consider the second or third wave of AI, now that kind of everybody's seen the light, I think we've hit the stage where everybody's an AI investor now. But I don't think we're quite ready to think about whether to become a generalist or to find a narrower focus if we want to remain focused. I think that decision's out there in front of us someday, but as of today, I still feel like there's a lot of head fakes out there for folks who are just chasing AI hype and who don't know yet where the technology works and doesn't work, and where markets windows are and are not open. So we think actually at moments like this, when there's so much hype around AI, that our expertise matters more than ever. And so we're just trying to support the next generation of great AI companies, one founder at a time.
So a lot to unbundle there. I'm going to go back to the whole, like, our lawyers don't like it when we give a term sheet to a company that started the day they got the term sheet. And I know, because I've suffered through dealing with this with, like, my partner, Matt Vandergoot, who's in our DC office, who's here today, or Eric Weiner, another partner in our group, who's standing up there because he's very much too cool to sit, where we've had a startup get a term sheet, but they haven't actually incorporated yet.
Very
That term
problematic.
sheet
Terrible.
puts a value on your shares, and you're getting your shares for doing work. The IRS, they're a pretty big deal in, like, DC, I think. They have this view that getting shares for work is the same thing as getting cash for work, or if you're like a
Compensation.
nearby Senator Gold Bricks. And so they have this, this whole thing about, like, wanting to take income tax on that. So that's a big problem, and it is great to put some chronological distance between when you got your founder stock and when your term sheet has arrived. It is, like, definitely on our top 5 list of mistakes or high-class problems that we get to deal with. But if you have that problem, there are ways to tackle it, and we're happy to. Happy's a stretch. Yeah, well, that's why we don't tell them that. Yeah. We do blame Jocelyn.
I love it when a founder says, "Oh, I can't take your term sheet yet. I haven't. My lawyer says I need to, get some paperwork done." And then I'm like, "Is that really the case, or are they just stringing me along while they talk to other investors?"
Yeah. Okay. Well, so going back to so before you got to Zeta, though, you were one of the. So you are responsible for building some of the fundamentals of modern cloud infrastructure back in the early days of the internet. You joined VMware when it was just a 300-person startup, and you stayed after the IPO. You joined Facebook early and stayed after the IPO. You joined a startup in the 90s, in the late 90s.
Started a startup. Well, I joined one, started another. Yes. Okay,
Trilogy,
yes,
which
yes,
also
I did found Trilogy.
Yeah.
Trilogy I joined. That was my first job.
So you've had 3 companies go public. One of them went public twice, which is an interesting trick.
It's true.
But you also have
Arguably, VMware went public 3 or 4 times, but I was only there for 2 of them.
and so you built a lot of the cloud infrastructure, and you invested in cloud. So we might say that you've looked at cloud from both sides now. And come on. So how is it different as an investor, and do you miss the excitement of building something so central and fundamental? Because your day job is a little more lazy now, right?
Yes, absolutely. Well, if your goal was to point out that I am literally from central casting, that is true, and to put the cherry on top, just to rewind even earlier in my resume, like the purest part of central casting that you can find on Jocelyn Goldfein is, not only did I graduate from Stanford University with a BS in computer science in 1997, but I was the first summer intern at Netscape. And so when you ask how I feel about all these experiences compared to my job, like, first of all, I feel extraordinarily grateful, just extraordinarily fortunate. I was in the right place at the right time, and my aspirations and taste led me to do things that I loved but did not realize would also be so impactful and valuable in the world. But the experience of, as a 20-year-old, being like, oh, this browser I've downloaded is so cool. I wonder if they have any internships on their website, and then like getting hired. And then like a minute later, there being like 1 million people using that browser. And then like a year later, this was like the nerd clubhouse. Okay, you gotta understand the day 0 of the internet, it was just a nerd clubhouse. Nobody else knew it existed. and like running around and telling all my friends to install it and letting them on the secret to like a year later URLs on the sides of buses. Okay, there can be no more formative life experience to convince you that the tech industry is the place to frickin' change the world, and to be absolutely, missionary, not mercenary, truly like idealistic and starry-eyed and optimistic about that. Like you couldn't ask for a more formative life experience. And then the dot-com boom happens, and then the bust happens, and I did a startup at the bust, which did not go well. We did not find product market fit. And then the next job is VMware, which I joined VMware at 300 people, and all of a sudden, we crack the data center and start doubling revenue and headcount every year, and we transform the freaking data center, and we make cloud possible. And so boom, confirmation. And then, in 2010, Facebook wasn't a startup in 2010. It was almost 2,000 people, and it had probably 500 million users when I joined the platform. So it already had a really big head of steam, but it was not yet the behemoth that it is today. There were certainly people who would say, oh, that's a fad. It's going to be gone in 5 years. Spoiler alert. So in 2010, but what we did at Facebook, there were literally 1 million users on the platform for every engineer when I joined Facebook. And so the sense of, again, optimism that you can change the world, that you can impact people, that you can hopefully not destroy civilization. We didn't think that at the time. So every single thing that I did in my whole career just reinforced the lesson that startups can change the world, that technologists with a vision and idealists can change the world. And so, yeah, that's been my passion. And so venture feels like every day I get to wake up and help people do that. And if I learned anything along the way on my lucky journey, and the people I got to rub elbows with and learn from, and the experiences I had, and if any of that can help someone else do it the next time, my God, what could be more fulfilling, and what could be a better way to pay it forward?
So we're going to talk more about your greatness, but first, a mistake. So
Which one?
Well, that's kind of it. So one of the fun things about doing a deep dive into the background of someone you've known for a number of years is you get to learn stuff, which has been the case with both of you. And you gave this great interview at Stanford in 2013. Mm-hmm. And in the interview, you talked about a mistake you made 5 weeks into your time at Facebook.
Yes.
And so you weren't trying to destroy the world, but you did almost take down email at Facebook.
I did absolutely take down email. Email was down for a day. Mark Zuckerberg's email was down, which was, he was annoyed about, but what everybody was really annoyed about was the sales department's email was down for a day, which meant revenue kind of paused, sort of. Maybe impacted revenue a little. I mean, it wasn't payment that was down, just email.
So do you want to, I've got some notes. I could talk a little bit about what happened, but do you want to talk a little bit about it, because you're learning from it and the culture there, and the culture totally. I'm sure morphed over time, but into problematic stuff. But talk a little bit about what your takeaways. You had some surprises.
Yes, you promised to ask Nasir about a mistake too.
I don't think I need to.
So many.
He may never have made any. Okay.
So many.
So all right. So we're rewinding to 2010, and mind you, I've been at VMware for 7 years, and I started at VMware as a tech lead in the hypervisor team. But one of the things about a company in hypergrowth is if you get your work done, you get given more work. And so I kept getting more work, and they kept promoting me up the ranks. And so I had been a VP of engineering for 2 years. Anyway, I hadn't been actively writing code in a long time. And I get to Facebook, and the Facebook ethos is, okay, we hired you as a director of engineering. Coding is not your day job, but we expect everybody in our engineering department to be hands-on and write code. And so you are all going through our 6-week new hire onboarding boot camp where you learn the code base, and you have a capstone project where you build a project of some significance before you graduate and go onto your team. And so I had been doing that, and I'd been fixing bugs and implementing small features on the site. But what I was kind of really passionate about was systems to help the engineering organization's efficiency scale. And one thing I noticed that Facebook had a really sloppy culture around their bug tracking. And in my view, you should have, if you have bugs open, it should be because they're important and you mean to fix them. And if they're not important and you don't mean to fix them, you should close them. You should get the snow off your windshield. And you should be able to look at your bug tracking system, your issue tracking system, as a system of record of what you need to do. And as a new hire interacting with the bug tracking system, looking for small fixes that I could do, it was full of really bogus stuff that was stale, that didn't apply anymore. Like nobody was making any effort to close out old bugs. And if you have good bug hygiene from day one, then you stay on top of your bugs and you close them or you fix them and you tag them with when they'll fit into the next roadmap release, whatever. But if you've never had good bug hygiene like that, and it was too late to start for Facebook when I got there in 2010, because it was already, 8 years in and 500 engineers, I'm like, okay, we got to go the other way with this, which is, all right, if somebody's actively working on a bug, it's going to get edited and updated. But if a bug hasn't been touched in I picked some time period, 6 months, a year, that thing is stale and it should get shut. And I'm like, well, there might be a few favorite issues that people are keeping around for posterity. So I'll just send an email. So I'm going to build a task reaper, which would automatically close out bugs, basically. And if someone really cared about that bug, they'd go reopen it. But I would send one morning email saying, hey, this bug seems stale, I'm going to close it. And if you were the owner on the bug or you were in the CC list of the bug, you would get that email and you might try to save that bug. So I meant to roll out the task grouper very gradually and run it on a few at a time. And I had an accident on one of my test runs, actually. I wasn't done with it. And I accidentally ran it on the whole bug database. And so there was probably 10,000 or so bugs that maybe each had a dozen people or so in the CC. So it just immediately, and there was no the email infrastructure around the internal tooling system was pretty light, homegrown, a little bit of jury-rigged, not production grade robust because it's not ever released on it. So anyway, I basically denial of service attacked the internal email servers by barraging it with 1 million or so emails in a 10-minute period. And so, but this was a long story. But the lesson I learned was I was crap, I've done something very bad. And people are going to be, daggers drawn for me, including especially the email IT guys. And what was remarkable was that that wasn't the reaction. It was definitely an inconvenience, and there were definitely people firefighting, and I felt particularly bad because the fire that needed to be fought was by the email administrators, and I, as the coder who had created the problem, wasn't actually in a position to help firefight. And so it was other people having to clean up after my mistake. And then, but the reaction of, and it literally inconvenienced every employee of the company, from Mark Zuckerberg to the janitors, and yet, the attitude was sort of oh, that sucks, but yeah, nobody was how dare you do that? Why weren't you more careful? What were you thinking? Just the attitude was, oh yeah, that didn't work out. Get it right next, we'll get it right next time. And it was just this was the time period when Facebook's slogan on the wall was move fast and break things, and I didn't really know what that meant. Why does it? And very few people, they get a lot of flack for that slogan. And you're right, the culture's changed because they officially changed the slogan. This was a few years ago, to move fast with stable infrastructure. It just tells you that they became mature. All right. And so this was an ethos I didn't fully understand when I joined, but at 4 weeks in, it was oh, break things, why not just move fast? Because speed is obviously good. Everybody would want to, why does it move fast and break things? Break things is not a good thing, right? Break things is a bad thing. And I realized it's if you tell people to move fast, but you don't give permission to break things, you're really telling them to go slow. Because if you punch people in the eye when they go fast and make a mistake, they will never go fast again. So if you don't have a permission infrastructure to screw up, then you don't actually have a culture that promotes speed. And Facebook actually had a culture that promoted speed and accepted as tolerable, not desirable, but as tolerable, breaking things and fixing them as a price they were willing to pay to go fast and to take risks. So that I don't think I could have learned that faster or on any other way than experiencing it myself.
You might have learned it in a less impactful way, but sure. Yeah. So Nasir, I'm not going to ask you about a ginormous mistake that you made, although you're welcome to share one. But what do you do as the founder and head of a venture fund, or I should say now a venture fund complex, congratulations, to encourage your founders and the startups that you back to make mistakes and to create a culture in which making mistakes is a reasonable and expected outcome?
Yeah, I think, the relationship with the founder is critically important, right? That starts from the very beginning. Once you become, the two of you become, or three, as a co-founder or multiple, you become investment partners together, and you're there on the journey. Like for us, we're pre-seed upwards to Series A, and then we reserve 50% of that capital for follow-on reserve capital. And you set expectations. You encourage the founder that we're an extension employee of your business, and especially for those who are first-time founders, right? You're going to make a number of mistakes, and then we have those who are second-time, third-time founders within our portfolio, and they've learned a lot. You can tell if they're going to make mistakes, it's going to be new mistakes this go around. But for us, it's really, and I'm sure in many venture firms, it's creating that safe space where no matter if it's an internal dynamic with your partner or the broader team, or if it's customer challenges, go-to-market challenges, like we always want to offer that safe space so you can really unpack your challenges. And it's not just the Zeal team; it's that we have a pretty deep bench, and have Samir here from Bank of America, who's been with us from the very beginning as well. He's in Fund 2 and Fund 1 and Fund 2, and also as part of the advisory board. And so we also have an extension of functional experts, those who have strong domain expertise and investment acumen and operating experience that can really push our thinking, but in turn connect with our founders as well. And so that's also part of the value prop of becoming a Zeal, part of the Zeal family portfolio as well, is that we have this deep. While we're a small and mighty team, we have a fairly deep bench around our advisory board, and an extension of our limited partner base as well, which consists of FIs, payers and providers, endowments, a pension now, which is really exciting, and of course, individuals who have built businesses, who particularly built storied franchises, like a Jason Green and a Scott Sandell and a James Slaver from Greylock, Emergence, and NEA, respectively. And so they've been more mentors to me and really helped shaping my thinking to build the best, the next generation venture capital firm. And so, it's where, I hate the word fun. We're building a product, we're building a company, a platform. And I think just how I've been thoughtful around talent, building out the team, how I've been thoughtful around portfolio construction, and how we think about post-investment value add, and involving, again, our broader bench. And so that's, TVPI is one thing, but hopefully all this leads to strong DPI.
Okay, so some people in the room definitely know what that is. Fewer people have seen DPI, but can you explain what TVPI and DPI are?
Yeah, so TVPI, essentially what you've invested, the amount of capital you've invested across your portfolio. DPI, essentially liquidity events, companies achieving IPO, getting acquired, private equity is probably another exit opportunity. Used to be SPACs. We're not doing SPACs these days, but I would say private equity, even IPO is not as active as it used to be in 2020, 2021, and before. But the other has been obviously, I think acquisitions is probably the most active liquidity event. So DPI is essentially
Dollars per invested dollar.
Dollars per investment in terms of
total value per invested. Yeah.
Yes.
So that ratio of total value is supposed to be more than 1 times the amount invested.
Yes.
Same thing with the dollars, but that you wait longer for those dollars to come back.
Right. And venture is 6-7 plus years, bit of more of a longer game versus growth equity and pre-IPO investing.
10, 12, I think these
12.
took 15 years.
Yeah. Takes a long time, especially at seed and pre-seed. So Nasir, you gave an interview a while back where someone asked you, what's your driving force? And you immediately, without hesitating, said outcomes. How does, and this is a question really for both of you, how does encouraging failure actually drive outcomes? And I know you were talking there about both financial outcomes like DPI and actually impactful outcomes. How does encouraging failure drive those outcomes?
And I think it goes back to having that safe space to be to your point be really aggressive on maximizing, the capital, the resources that we offer, and not just us, but the entire cap table. And then, I use this term internally within Zeal and across portfolio companies, and even at home with my the 3/4 and my 7-year-old is just dream big. And that mantra, as savvy as it may sound, and just not being afraid. I mean, we're investing. 100% of our founders has at least a woman and or a person of color on the founding team with a commensurate amount of equity. And so there is, and then less about the gender and ethnicity, but also where they come from. The more part of our diligence process, given how early we invest, like you learn about their failures, you learn what keeps them going, and of course, a lot of these companies are deeply rooted personally. They found that they can build a business out of an idea that they encounter every single day, and they found that people or partners or organizations will actually pay for this idea. And so there can be a sense of intimidation in terms of like dreaming big, but just giving them that space to go full throttle in their idea, and make sure that they know that they have support when, again, things are the most challenging. And so lots of data points of having late night phone calls with Wamino Abbey, who is our $1 billion company. We got into a Susu that many of you in this room may know about, based here in New York City, at a 12 pre, 15 post money valuation. And 16 months later, Samir became a $1 billion company. And it's and in just having that relationship, even when you're skyrocketing so quickly, 28-year-olds, now you're what, I think 200 plus employee base, and so usually when you get that big in the venture asset class, or at least in startups in general, you start to think about maybe a more seasoned CEO. But Samir and Wamino are crushing it. They have exceptional executive coaching. They work well together. They have an exceptional board. And then they have other members of the cap table, even us, who are probably not as involved as much, given how big they are. But they still have challenges, and just using them as an example. But yeah, again, going back to offering that safe space for our founders is critically important. That gives them the courage to fail early, but with a soft landing, knowing they have the right support behind them.
Jocelyn, let's shift gears a little bit, because we've talked about failure. I want to talk about terror. You've explained that AI is a great opportunity for things like a cyber attack, or climate, or other things where the human brain can't factor in everything and build its own model, right? You need machine learning. And you need an enormous data set. You also, in an interview, gave an answer about robots, and you said something like, "I'm pretty sure that robots will not take take over and kill us." But there was something very tentative in your voice. This was about 5 years ago, and I just want to know: is that firmed up in one direction or the other?
I'm pretty sure the robots are not going to take over.
Still pretty sure, not
Still
sure.
pretty sure of that. Well, I will tell you, if you want to be, I just think the idea, okay, so first of all, the techniques of machine learning and even generative AI are just, I'm so mad actually that our industry consents on the phrase artificial intelligence, because it really makes you think of consciousness and sentience. Mm-hmm. And even the people running around talking about AGI, it's well, let's double click on this AGI phrase, but certainly what they're implying is that we're going to have machines that have their own volition and will and cognition and sentience. And I just don't think that that's the path this technology is on. It is making predictions based on numbers. Its ability to plan or optimize or predict are all grounded in looking at a training data set and spitting out another number. Just on a vastly bigger scale than our tiny brains can kind of have good intuitions about. And so I don't think that that's going to lend itself to cognition. And so I don't think so that's like, to me, like a very tenuous and distant kind of a threat. I think there are very real threats that we all should be a little terrified about. And like in the same way that when I was a kid, we were terrified about nuclear war. And, and then there was a hot minute here where we were sort of terrified about, biological weapons and, maybe COVID was made in a lab. And like, okay, so AI-powered drones and missiles are a weapon of massive destruction. Like they create a form of weaponry that is, should be right up there with chemical warfare and biological warfare and nuclear weapons as like something we're pretty chilled about the possibility of. All right, and we should have like international treaties to govern those things, just like we do all other WMDs. And by the way, that goes for physical weaponry like drones and missiles, but it also goes for, I think there is like a new war front like that we've seen unfold, especially in Russia and Ukraine, which is the war front of maybe propaganda is not new, maybe propaganda has always existed, but bringing that into the digital realm where, convincing voters in the United States to be, bullish or bearish on sending military aid to one country or another can actually turn the tides of a military war. And so the power of propaganda to be an order of magnitude more powerful when driven by AI, like should be viewed as, a form of digital WMD. And so I think those are like near and present dangers that we should absolutely be pretty stressed out about versus like, more science fiction scenarios.
That's terrifying.
Sorry.
And I know
You asked for terror, man.
Yeah, no, I didn't ask for it. I wanted, soothing. But you also.
I think the robots are. You can be soothed about the robots.
Okay, well, that's good. So the backup plan, by the way, for the robots with us is we represent a company called Figure AI, and about 2 weeks ago, a bunch of us were counsel on this deal where they raised $675 million. OpenAI, Microsoft, Jeff Bezos, and others. And Mark Kesslin, who's in the back, a partner here, led the strategic pieces of that. And I figured, like, if we worked on that deal, the robots would leave us alone later because, like, we helped them, right?
Yeah,
it's like you got to suck up to your overlords.
Yeah.
So with when you talk about disinformation and the spread of disinformation, and I don't know if this is something that you were looking at as well, Ms. Year, you were central to taking Facebook mobile, and it was the third and first successful, third time they tried.
Yeah.
Versus, so is there anyone you want to apologize to?
Well, even worse than that, like that was my last project at Facebook. My first project at Facebook was bringing machine learning to the newsfeed ranker. So I'm central to the algorithmic feed. No, I don't think. I think that when you were building something, I don't think that, I think that there's a lot of, I think what algorithmic feeds reveal is what our own underlying preferences are. This is the one thing I learned at Facebook. Or I learned many things at Facebook. This is one of the things that really surprised me and defied my intuitions, which is that, what people say they want and what their behavior demonstrates they want are two very different things. And I think what algorithmic feeds give people is what they actually want, which is, candy instead of broccoli sometimes. So maybe much of the time. And anyway, I have deep thoughts about polarization. I think the content creators are the ultimate source of accountability. I think distribution, like I fundamentally believe that like distribution is a good thing and democratizing access to distribution is a good thing. But boy, we're not prepared yet. We don't know yet how to regulate, how to content creators in a world where distribution is available to everybody and not limited to a select elite few.
Yeah.
Like I think that's where we are, is like we got the car before we, had a DMV to test and license people.
And I also want to talk about some of the amazingly positive impact stuff that you are both involved in, one of which is you were my boss on the Harvey Mudd board.
Board relationships or boss relationships.
You were, well.
I helped recruit you to the Harvey Mudd board. I'll take credit for that.
That you did as well, and were an amazing vice chair. And that was, so it's one of the ways in which you've been giving back in a STEM-related and inclusive context. And I know that there are other things that are on your roadmap for that. I don't know if you want to talk about any of those experiences.
No, I mean, it stems from what I said earlier. I feel so enormously just lucky and grateful. Like I got to be a part of these formative experiences that I had, the impact I had on the world. And I think that, there's so many ways it could easily have gone the other way, a different coin flip, and I think that I've been so lucky to have the chance to sort of take my aptitudes and things I like to do and have access to this amazing, fulfilling, creative work that has impact on the world. And by the way, happens to be really handsomely remunerated too. And why can't everybody have that? Like everybody should have that. That shouldn't be a privilege. That should be available universally. And so, I really think that access to a STEM education is what made that possible to me. And to the extent that that access is really unevenly available to different people, like blowing that wide open, making that access available to everybody, that's something I'm personally passionate about. And it's something I can do something about because I represent like not just somebody who can write a philanthropic check, but somebody who can be a role model and have network or be in a position to make decisions that help open doors for people. And so Harvey Mudd, I joined the board of in 2013. I served for 9 years. That I actually termed out recently. But that was an institution that was, Harvey Mudd is like an MIT or a Caltech style STEM education, but it's in the form factor of a small liberal arts college. And they had very quietly over a 6 or 7 year period gone from like the usual, gender ratio in computer science, which is like, I think when I graduated from Stanford in 97, women were 15% of the CS grads. And then the numbers did not change very much for the next 10 years. So Harvey Mudd was like that. And they'd gotten to 50-50. And, they had the advantage that they, all the women in a STEM school had some STEM inclination at least, but they got there. And it was remarkable how they did it because it wasn't coercive and it wasn't quotas. It was just focusing on making it inclusive and giving on-ramps. And then the people who liked it had the chance to figure out they liked it and to pursue it. And so, it's still a small school, but I felt like this is a curriculum and a pedagogy and an approach that can be exported. And it's also like a proof point because if Harvey Mudd can do it, then why cannot MIT do it or Stanford do it or Caltech do it? And so it kind of served as a way to really be leveraged across, at least in the United States, educational institutions, and I think beyond as well as a kind of a role model institution. And so they've been really successful. And shortly after I joined the board, we really broadened the footprint of our focus from not just gender to also other dimensions of inclusion, including, of course, ethnicity, but also LGBTQ and socioeconomic status. And there's a lot of really hard, thorny, deeply ingrained problems. Like there's no bad guy, there's no bouncer at the door trying to stop it, but there are so many systemic, ingrained, interlocked, it's not one individual who's being a jerk. It's like a whole apparatus that has to change in concert to open these doors and create these on-ramps. And so it was, a little chance to work on that. That felt good.
That's fascinating. I'll point out two. One is I'm huge on mentorship. More specifically, first-generation college graduates. I think if anyone thought the American dream is dead, you look at a first-generation college student, that person, he or she, is navigating, climbing a ladder that no one around them has climbed before, and have a goal to run 51 marathons across the country to raise $1 million for first-generation college students and scholarships. I've ran 19 so far, and scheduled to run 2 in the middle of the country. So that's my very niche focus of mentees, is those who are FGs. The other is putting more diverse inspiring diverse institutional investors in business. And recently, we announced an initiative as part of our Barclays Black Formation Investment strategy, $50 million allocation, 100% backed by Barclays, and 45 million of that obviously is a little less than that. You factor in the whole management fees, but 45 million of that is focused on direct investing in founders at the earliest stages and market as a generalist strategy. 50% of that strategy will coincide with Zeal Core, which is health equity, as I mentioned earlier, financial technology, and education, workforce. What I'm most excited about, which I think is a powerful signal, is training functional experts. These are individuals who might have, who are probably particularly Black senior executives at technology companies. They are ecosystem leaders. They have a skill set around sales or talent, but they're also proximate to diverse entrepreneurs, and probably in many cases more proximate than venture capitalists. And so what's missing is that they don't have investment acumen, they don't have a track record, they have the aspirations of becoming a GP one day. And so we're carving out 5 million of that capital, of that allocation from Barclays to, in sort of like a Zeal masterclass, teach them how to conduct diligence, source diligence, write investment memos. Each scout will have their own investment strategy. So, and like a GP, they'll have 12 months to deploy that $125,000. They're not having $125,000 in their own account. They're going to draw down 25,000, 10,000, 75, teach them about portfolio construction. And so I don't think there's not one venture capital firm, and I can be wrong, that's led by a diverse manager that's not a story franchise. It doesn't just have $5, $10, $15 million laying out there, but we're only 4 years old, and this is an impact narrative too. And we're putting inspiring GPs in business. We're building track records. If you think about the challenge of GPs that as in both women and particularly women and BIPOC fund managers, it's because they haven't either spun out or worked at a traditional VC firm, or simply just lack a track record. And so we talk about that. I feel like we hover over it when we talk about first-time managers and building investment firms. But my hope is that 5 years on average from now is that those functional experts can leverage that Zeal Scout track record and go off and start their own investment firm. And now we're starting off with just with Black functional experts today, but my hope is that we expand that and to Latinx and LGBTQ plus and women aspiring fund managers. And so I just think there's a gap there where it's important that we're training the next generation of diverse institutional investors, because we know when we have more diverse institutional investors allocating capital at both the GP and LP level, you'll see more of a level playing field, this idea of democratizing access to capital. And so that's the hypothesis, and I'm really excited to have the utmost conviction that these are functional experts that a lot of folks know and have done a lot for the community, but just haven't had the ability to allocate capital.
That's fantastic. I can't wait to fund them through First Post Partners and invest in them.
Yes.
And I will just mention, not to put Jackson on the spot, because he just walked in. Jackson from Wellington is going to fund them too, because that's his day job, right? That's your day job, funding underrepresented managers. Yeah. So for those of you, I saw Lorraine Pendleton in the room and Molly Fowler from Dorm Room Funds, who's in line from BBG. Like those of you who are underrepresented fund managers, I'm just pointing out a target. You don't need, this is called human intelligence.
Jackson came in.
Make sure that you're. And Jocelyn mentioned a coin flip, and you and I had a conversation. We both read the book, The Other Wes. And we talked a little bit beforehand about this because there's something you said in an interview years ago. Do you want to talk a little bit about chance and coin flips?
Yeah, I mean, so Wes, now Governor of Maryland, dear friend, said you know Wes as well. As I mentioned, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and single mother. My mother had me her freshman year at Clark College, now called Clark Atlanta, and my brother and I were so tight. I mean, we did everything together. We're 4 years apart. He's 4 years younger than me, and he, but like most siblings, we all have that sibling who, we want to go off and do your own thing because maybe your sibling is getting more of the attention. In my case, playing basketball, I was the humility aside, the guy, in school, in the neighborhood, and he wanted to do, something totally different. And I only share this because, there's when we it has nothing to do, well, there's a correlation between venture because, and it's not just venture, it's just whatever we do for a living. So what gets you going? What motivates you? And it is today, a component of that is my brother in terms of how far he's come. He spent five and a half years in prison, and it was a gut punch. I mean, my mom was incredibly strict between the two of us, and he still, got out the house and did his thing. And I remember while he was incarcerated, I would go back and I would cry, as after we had these conversations through that thick glass wall, and it just put a lot into perspective. And Wes does talk about this idea that the truth is, his story could have been mine, and my story could have been his, yet we share just a common, deep love for each other. And for me, it was just I was never going to give up on him, as many of folks, including family, gave up on him. And but when I think about where I sit now, in a fairly privileged in terms of access to resources and social networks and now capital and innovation, he wants to get into the apparel business. He wants to learn how to he knows what I do for a living. And so, while it's, I'm not vanguarding him on questions I would ask a tech founder, there are some fundamental questions I've been able to share with him recently. And now he's starting to get his apparel business off the ground. And he's been 2.5 years now at Iron Mountain. So he's also a great, he's doing exceptionally well. But it was a dark moment in our family, particularly myself, because we were just so close. And but yeah, it's legacy, and just to bring this all home is incredibly important to me. And I was not going to let his downfall be represent what he stands for the rest of his life. I'm spend late nights with him, strategizing what family could look like, what his apparel business can look like. And I say this also, I'm sure there are many of us in this room who have, whether it's your sibling or mom and dad or, and then the last thing I'll add is I'm learning, I'll be 40 this year at, can't believe it. And it's and you know how you, for those who are, I don't know what this feels like, but I know I'm getting at that age, but at the same time, you're working as an entrepreneur, you're building a company, and mom and dad's getting old, grandma. I mean, just reality things, and for me, it's just finding this balance, ensuring, and I bring this because I know we all feel this, we're grinding, trying to be successful in our own right, but before you know it, your folks are getting. You got to lean in and take care of them, and that's the case now with my grandmother and my mom having to stop working to take care of mom. And so I'm just, I've learned to put a lot into perspective, and that's carrying me where, to stay laser focused in building the firm as well.
There is an empathy, a vulnerability, an opportunity for trust that you exude that makes you someone that people are magnetically drawn to work with. And one of the things that I've seen with some of the founders where we end up doing internal investigations, where we have, like our ex-Department of Justice lawyers who are colleagues here at Lowenstein, look at things, is, if boards, if governance creates a situation where you're embarrassed, where something is stigmatized, and you feel like you can't have a conversation, and what you just did and talked about and the way you shared that is kind of the opposite of that, which we need more of in venture in so many ways, and I appreciate and value it.
Of course.
So thank you.
Of course.
And speaking of family, Jocelyn, 11 years ago in an interview, you said that the best decision you made was not a decision you realized was going to be the best decision, and it was who you married.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Still,
Speaking of the many lotteries I won in my life.
I know you're still married, but still true?
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, look, I think it's really easy to say that like the best life decision is who you married, especially with, this is my college sweetheart, and we married right out of college. So I already told you I graduated in 97. Yeah. We married in 99, so we're this year will be 25, just like VentureCrush. And a couple of like truly beautiful human beings exist because of that. My 16 and 19-year-olds. So yeah, like that's I think easy to say as your best life decision, but it was also. But the context of that interview is that was also the best career decision I made. And when I married him, I did not realize I was also making a really good career decision. And I made some great career decisions. I want to say that being the first summer intern at Netscape, joining VMware in 2003, joining Facebook in 2010,
no question,
joining Zeta, joining the AI firm in 2016. These were all very good career decisions. Okay, I'm lucky to have access to those opportunities, but I'll take credit for seizing the opportunity, the lucky opportunity that came my way. But I think that who you marry, who's your partner on the home front, and in those aspects of your life is such an important career decision. And I think that I'm in this Facebook group called Moms in Tech, which is sort of like a love to hate read group for me. I mostly lurk. But there's a lot of women who are like, I can't get anything done in my career, and my husband's so unsupportive, and he does, like, I do everything, and and I'm just like, well, why'd you marry him? Like, dude, you have signed up for this, like, self own goal. I mean, yes, like, and anyway, I would never comment on someone's post and say that, but I also think, oh my God, there but for the grace of God go I. Because like I met this guy when I was 17, and I married him when I was 23, and like, did I know what I was going to need out of a career and life partner at those ages? Not a clue. And I did not know. And truthfully, it doesn't matter that much until you have kids, because the amount of the workload associated with a home life is just not that high when you're two 20-somethings without kids and without a lot of responsibilities and with two high-paying jobs, okay, which means you can afford some help to outsource some things. And the fact that not only is he on board with me having a big career, but he's my biggest champion, and his support. You can find these great comics on the internet that there's, God, I wish I could remember, that talks about like the cognitive load that comes from being the primary parent and like having everything in your head. Okay, the person who does that is my husband. I'm not here to brag about having a 50-50 marriage. I'm here to brag about having like maybe 70-30 marriage. 30. So like having that, like I don't know how to tell young women how to have a career like mine without having a husband like mine. Because I don't like too often everybody gets up and pretends you just do everything and you can be super mom and you can be, the mom in tech, the woman writing in the mom in tech group, somebody told her that she could do all the dishes and all the laundry and all the vacuuming and all the school plays, and that she could also have an executive career. And the fact is, American corporations are not set up to let you do all that stuff and also have an executive career, let alone American public schools, let alone, you name it. Like, it is too much for one person. And so if you are going to have a kids and a co-parenting arrangement that creates the workload of a third career in this 2 adult household, then like, you know, like the math doesn't work. Maybe it will when we all have AI assistants.
This is why we need the
Maybe we'll all
robots.
go down to like 10 hours a week of real work, and the robots will do the vacuuming. I can't wait. Tell Figure I need a dish doing robot, a laundry robot. I've got a vacuuming robot actually. It's okay. So
Well, we're glad you're covered on the carpet lint front. It's important. It's important to us.
so maybe that's like the future of Liberty. But in the meantime, like who you marry and how they support you and how they show up for you means everything. Means everything.
That's awesome. And great that you have a 30-70 or 70-30. Nasir, there's a question about how people can find out more about getting on board to develop that track record, and then we're gonna
Sure.
wrap up.
Sure. So, one, I had to shout him out because he just walked in, Rich, who leads our scout strategy. So I would just email Rich at zealvc.co. And feel free to email me for whatever reason, Nasir at zealvc.co. And we'll be more than happy to talk to you, whether it's an entrepreneur or a scout.
And before you very wisely recruited Rich to join you at Zeal, Rich also had started pre-pandemic a Black executive network,
right.
which we started here in this office. We had the first thing 2 years before the pandemic, something like that, maybe 3. Yeah. So great job snagging Rich.
No, we got an all-star team, and Rich is crushing it. It's been beautiful, the firm build, and thank you again, Ed, for having us. I'll leave you just one thought is that one, if entrepreneurs are truly going to be the change agents of our country and for the globe for that matter, then it has to include everybody. And I that is at core of our firm. In my challenge is that should be the core at every firm, whether you're an emerging manager or you're a story franchise. If we're truly going to democratize access to capital and entrepreneurship, we've got to include everyone. So we got to check our blind spots. And so that's my challenge to everyone here and on the web is to check our blind spots, because access to opportunity and innovation is in every ounce of this country, not just very few places.
That is a great note to end on. So we'll drop some stuff in the chat. I want to thank all of you and the VentureCrush team for being here, and I want to go listen to Margaret Glaspie.